This is Brooke with So Yum, and today we're doing a complete walkthrough of the Mermaid Block. Okay, so here we are with the Mermaid Block. This is the 9-inch block, and I put it into a hoop just for a very easy decoration. And here's the pattern. So we are going to go through the pattern from start to finish so that if you are unsure of how you want to do fusible web applique, or this is your first time, it will be a lot easier for you, because sometimes when you look at a pattern, especially if it's a designer you haven't really worked with, the words don't mean much. We tend to be more creative people, and sometimes visual just does so much better for us. So we're going to walk you through the pattern. Now when you print out the pattern, it may come in all one folder, or it may have 3 separate downloads. So there would be, if there's 3 separate downloads, there would be the instructions, the embellishment guide, which just tells you exactly where and how to do the hand embroidery embellishments, and then also the pattern pieces themselves. And all of the sizes are in their own grouping. So on all of the patterns, you're going to have your 1-inch block, of course. So when you print it out actual size, and then you'll make sure that that is 1 inch, and that just makes sure that the pattern is the appropriate size. And then each page is going to have what pattern it is and what size block it is for. And then since I do trimless patterns, there will be numbers, and when you go to put the patterns together, you will actually overlap those numbers and tape down there, and then you can always fill in if you need to where some of the empty spaces are from the printer. So for today's walkthrough, we are doing, oh, I already have it on top, look at that, the 12-inch block. So I'm just going to set these off to the side, and I'm going to take you through how I do my blocks. So the 12-inch block has 3 pattern pieces. Now they are designed to all fit together. However, this one that has just some of the pattern pieces on, it doesn't need to be taped to this bigger pattern. So that can just be set aside. In your pattern piece, you are going to have the layout. So something to where when we tape this together, and I will go ahead and do that now, you pretty much just line up the letters. You can use a light box for this, or you can just wing it because you'll want to see a continuation of those lines. And then you just tape those joints together. Like, this is the placement guide. It's going to show you where each piece goes, and this also will show you what order it can go down in. So A is going to be the first piece down, B is the second piece down, C is the third piece down, and so on and so forth, because some of these pieces do overlap each other. So you want to line them up as nice as possible. And so we also have one pattern piece there, and then the rest of the pattern pieces here. So what I'm going to do for first step for fusible applique is I'm going to trace these onto my fusible web. Okay, I personally use Heat and Bond Featherlight. I really like it. It's nice and lightweight once you put the pattern together. I don't like it to be too heavy because I do a lot of hand stitching. Here, I'll show the Mermaid Block again. As you can see, I tack all of my raw edge applique down by hand, but we will be showing you how to do it by machine as well. So with fusible web, with Heat and Bond at least, you have a paper side, and then you have this shiny side. That's one of the glue sides. So all of the pattern pieces are reversed, because when you do the fusible web method, it flip-flops everything. So you need to trace it out in reverse, and then when we iron it down, it's going to be the right size. So what I'm going to do is just lay that over my pattern piece, and just using a pencil, I'm just going to trace. It does not have to be perfect. And you don't want to put it right up against the edge, because when we cut this piece out, we want to give it just a hair past the pencil line, about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch, and you'll see what I mean. And put the letter on the pattern piece, or else you might forget which one is which, especially if you have a lot of patterns. This one doesn't have too many pieces. Some of them can get pretty crazy. I think we can get D out of this spot. See how I'm just leaving a little bit of space in between, because when I cut them out, I want them to have a little bit of a border. Now on each pattern piece too, it will tell you how many pieces to cut. Most of our patterns, there's just one piece that you would cut out. A lot of our designs are more organic. We work with a lot of concepts that are fun, natural. Okay, so now we have, let's see. And these little bits here, when you cut them out, you can keep them. I actually have a little bowl that I keep the tiny pieces in, because sometimes, especially if you're doing smaller size blocks, you'll have some small pieces to cut out, and it's nice to not let that, oh no, see, I'm going to have to redo this, but that's okay. I'm going to adjust it right there, and since it's pencil and it's on the paper side of the fusible web, I can erase. So let's try that again. Alright, just a little bit of a bumper around the pattern piece. Got to label that one E. The only thing we have left is the tail. Okay, make sure everything is covered by the fusible web. And that is A. Oh, I forgot one. No, I didn't. I have them all. So now I'm going to cut them out. Scissor-wise, I do have a pair of scissors that I use pretty much just for doing any cutting on fusible web. It has to be sharp enough to be able to cut on fabric too, but they're not technically my fabric scissors. So I usually get maybe a cheaper pair of fabric scissors and dedicate them to this job so that I, maintain some scissors that are very sharp, very good for cutting maybe more difficult fabrics. And so those go off to the side of my bin. So now what you're going to do is just continue cutting out all your pieces, and you can see how I'm leaving just a bumper around it. So continue cutting out, and we'll meet you right back here with the next step. Okay, we're back. We have cut out all of our pieces. So now we're going to put them onto our fabrics, and because I do not have an ironing surface right here, I am going to show you one of the optional things under the materials needed, and that is the precision fusing mat. If you do any baking and you've used those silicone mats for baking cookies on instead of parchment paper, that's exactly what this is. This one was made specifically for quilting by Precision Quilting Tools, and I have it in 2 sizes. But if you're able to find maybe a cheaper silicone cooking mat that has, the availability of being heated up to temperatures of like 450 to 500 degrees, that is perfect. That will do the exact same thing. So that was right there in the optional under the silicone applique mat in the pattern. So we have our pieces, and we want to talk just a little bit about placement, color strategy, color theory. With this mermaid, I think what is most important maybe to start with, if you're not just going to use like a solid white or a cream, is your background. You need to know what your background is so that you can know what the other colors need to be in order to make them stand out more. I am going to be using this batik. I've used it in several blocks because it can kind of look like wind or it can look like waves. I absolutely love it. Beautiful mottled background batik, and that's going to be my background. So I knew I wanted something nice and dark for my tail. Okay, and so then I'm going to use this teal one right here for the tail. It's going to give excellent contrast. That's one of the biggest pattern pieces we have, so I really want it to stand out. And then next would be the skin tone, and she's going to have this nice medium brown color skin. It looks nice with everything. There's still a good contrast between the tail. The bodice, I am partial to reddish purple bodices for some reason. I've done 3 of these and they've each had some sort of a reddish purple bodice. There's enough of a contrast between the tail because that's what it's closest to, and there's a good contrast between the skin tone, which is nice because it will stand out. And then for the hair, I decided on lime, and there's actually 2 hair pieces, if you will. I somehow misplaced one of them. I'll have to find it. But I'm going to be using this lime polka dot. It's a little out there. I really like to mix my colors. I don't like to be too matchy-matchy. I like to mix patterns. I like to mix prints. I like to have fun with my applique. So that's going to be her hair. It's not going to stand out as much against the background, but that's fine because the body will. And there's a lot of hair, so I can even do some embellishment on it, thread painting with the machine, or maybe using a darker floss to hand embroider it to make it stand out more. But those are going to be my fabric choices. So next we are going to fuse our pieces to the fabric, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so my iron has heated up, and now we are going to transfer our pattern pieces to the fabric. So here's a note about having a fabric stash for applique. If I find fabric out in the world that is mostly one color, let's take this one for example. There is some blue and white in there, but if you just look at it, you see light green. I'm going to get at least 1/4 of a yard, possibly 1/3 of a yard of it to put into my applique stash, because you want things that are one color pretty much. You can still use multicolored things. It's harder to do. So nice textures are perfect. I don't do solids quite as much, except maybe skin tones, because it's going to be so much easier to find a nice variety of skin tones in solids. But I do try to stay away from mostly just solids in my appliques. But I understand most people aren't going to be like me and be a little crazy in how they mix and match. I prefer prints, but that's just me. And so if you just get, like, you know, even a couple, like a fat quarter or maybe some charm squares. I have some of this stuff that came from Kona. It's just a wide range of their neutrals, and it's perfect for so many things, and it's just a charm pack. But 1/4 yards, 1/3 of yards, add it to your stash, it's perfect. All right, so we're going to start with the tail. We are putting on this texture, and I do not cut out rectangles for this. As you can see, I've cut stuff out of here before. I go ahead and fuse directly to my fabric, and you're going to fuse this piece to the wrong side of your fabric. Now, when we traced this out, we traced it on the paper side, so that is paper facing up. That's the glue side. So we're going to do glue side to the wrong side of the fabric, like so. And you can do it however makes sense for you. So right there. And things are shifting on me. Things are shifting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I have found with the lighter weight fusible web, it doesn't need steam, but it also keeps it on there until you can stitch it down. And the more heat you put on it, the less it's likely to stick. So what I will do is I'll just press kind of firmly, count to 3, 1, 2, 3, and let it up, and then let it cool. You can move it out of the way, but don't try to manipulate it too much. It's going to peel away from the fabric and it's not going to set, and you're going to be angry at it, and I don't want you to be angry at your fabric. So there is A. B is the long part of the hair. I found my other hairpiece. This is going to be our mermaid's bangs, so she has flower bangs. She's like a mermaid flower child. So here's the hair going on this polka dot. So we're going to set that down. 1, 2, 3. And move it to the side. So there's the bangs on the flowers. 1, 2, 3. Move it to the side. Now here is her bodice. 1, 2, 3. Move it to the side. And last but not least, her torso. And you can see I have already cut a torso out of this, actually from the same block. And we're gonna cut another one out. Let's see if I can, nope, that's not gonna work, but will this configuration work? If you have leftover pieces of paper like that, you wanna be careful. If I peeled that away, it's gonna show glue, and then it's gonna glue it to my iron, and that's not gonna make me happy. So be careful. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, so now that these are off cooling, I'm going to test out the tail. The tail is nice. So I'm going to get my paper fabric scissors, the ones that can do both, and I'm going to cut it out. Now, we gave a bumper so that we would make sure the entire design was on the fabric. So now when you cut out your fabric pieces, cut on your pencil line. If you make a little mistake, it's not a big deal. Applique is so easygoing. And a lot of these patterns do offer a little bit of overlap. And I'm just going to cut that off and get that out of the way, so that when you're going to put them together, you kind of have a little bit of wiggle room. If the pattern, if all the pieces are just right next to each other, sometimes you can end up with a gap. And that's even trying to be as precise as possible when cutting things out. So you just do your best. Everything will work out just fine. All right, so that one is cut out, and then I usually just set it off to the side. I'll take my pattern and kind of place the pieces on there. Just gives me a nice double check to make sure that things look the way that I want to before I actually start ironing things together, and also to make sure that I cut out all the pieces or keep them in a safe place. So now I'm going to go ahead and continue cutting out all of my pieces, and I will meet you back here in just a second. Okay. All right, so here we are with all of our pieces, and you can kind of lay them out in order just to kind of see how they go before you actually iron anything down. So there's A, B. You can see how there's a lot of the hair going over her face right now, but that's because we overlap. C, D, and E. Oh, I love her hair. Oh, this is going to be wonderful. Okay, so we know we have all of our pieces. We'll set that off to the side, and right here I have my background. Now, if you do not have a silicone fusible mat, then you will be doing everything directly to the background. And a light box might come in handy. I will kind of show you how to do it without actually doing it because I prefer using my silicone mat, and I'll show you how to do that. If you lay this over, you can see the outline. So what I would do is, in order, I would peel off this paper, lay it down, and iron it. Peel off the paper, lay it down on the background, and iron it. And you would keep going until you had all of your pieces on there, and you can see the lines through the placement guide. I, however, am going to put things together in units on the silicone mat. So to do that, I put my pattern underneath the mat, and hopefully you can see this on camera. The grid looks a little wonky and crazy, but it looks like a regular baking mat, and so I can see the lines perfectly underneath here. So I'm going to fuse these together and then move them to my background. And this actually works really well if you're, say, putting this on a pillowcase or something like that. It's already kind of made, or an apron. You can make the unit separately and then put it exactly where you want it. So I'm going to lay that down. There's A. You're just peeling the paper off, and that just reveals more glue on the other side. So this is like a double-sided interfacing. There's her hair. And here's her torso. Now I have found that the torso arms can sometimes be a little wonky. You want to make sure that her arm is covering that part. So it might not line up completely in other areas, but that is okay because this is going to cover it, okay? You just want to make sure that she is placed where you want her. Sometimes those arms can get a little out of place, but you can put them back in place. And the good thing about using a silicone mat is I can kind of rearrange everything until I'm very happy, and then I apply the iron, and nothing shifts because it's not sticky per se, but it kind of holds on to it. Like with the bangs, if I go up to the line, I'm going to have a little bit of a gap there. So I'm just going to kind of come down, make sure that that point comes to the side of her head, and that covers that gap right there, so her bangs go like that. And so then the last is her bodice. But only if the paper wants to come off. Right now the paper doesn't want to come off. Come on, there we go. All right. So now I just got to make sure that I am aligning the points with where the arms are and covering that gap. So that looks really good. So now on the fusible mat, I can 1, 2, 3, just over any of the overlapping points. And then let this cool. And this will peel up all as one unit, carefully of course, and then I can transfer it to my project, or my backing, or my apron, or my pillow, or whatever I happen to be doing with it. But first, we have to let it cool completely. So while it's cooling, let me show you how I find the center of my background fabric. I like to cut my background fabric at least 2 inches wider than the finished block, and it will say that on the instructions. But at least 2 inches. You can go bigger and then you can cut it down, that's perfectly fine, but you do want to find the center of your piece. My piece is 14 by I think 18. That's the piece that I had lying around. I'm going to kind of fold it. You don't want to press over there necessarily, just right there in the center, so that when I open it up I can tell exactly where that is. So now with the mermaid, if I were to find the center of the mermaid, it's going to be right around here. I might even mark that. I kind of want to try to hit that mark with my center. So my pattern, or my unit, is now cool, so I can pick it up. And as you can see, because it was on the silicone mat, none of the glue that was just touching the mat has been activated. Only the pieces that were touching other fabrics. So I know this point needs to be centered, and now I can look at it and see if I like it. If I need to shift it around a little bit more, I can. And I know I can actually shift this a little bit higher because this has a greater contrast. So visually, because this is lighter on a light background and this is darker, I can lift it slightly and it will look perfect. So now I'm going to fuse it in place, but first I'm going to get my fusing mat back over here so that I don't ruin my surface underneath. If you have a small pressing table too, that's even better to have underneath the fusing mat. I just don't have mine here at the workshop today. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And you don't want to drag the iron across. You just want to kind of lift and move the iron. Okay. All right, and then let that cool before you do anything with it, and then we'll be back and show you how to stitch down all that applique. We are here at the machine. I have a Juki DX7, but for most of these you can do it with any machine. We're going to show 3 machine stitches and 1 hand stitch on this mermaid, and I'm going to be showing the straight stitch first because that is what I recommend. First of all, for beginner sewists and beginner appliqueurs, because it's the easiest, both to maneuver around curves and also when you're learning your machine. I like to switch to an open toe foot. I'm going to try to adjust the camera angle so that you can see exactly what's going on. If you keep an eye on your needle, then you'll know where the stitches are going, and if your machine is adjustable for the needle position, you can adjust it. So I like to just kind of line up where I want my stitches to go about 1/16 of an inch inside of the area of the next fabric. And I'm going to go ahead and start. I have a long tail and I'm not going to back stitch because I'm going to pull the stitches underneath and tie them into a knot to get rid of them. So I'm not going to back stitch at all. I'm just going to make sure I have a nice long tail. I'm going to start right there in the center. I have a relatively short stitch on my machine. It's 2.2. Thread wise, I have a medium gray in the bobbin because I'm going to use different color threads for the different colored parts, and that way I just need to switch out my top thread, and the bottom and the bobbin is a medium gray, and that works just fine. When it comes to thread color, you can just do all of this in gray. You could do all of it in black. You could do all of it in white. You could do it in invisible thread. I personally do not like working with invisible thread in a machine, but you can do it. The sky's the limit. I like to match it somewhat. It doesn't match perfectly, but along those lines, and that works great for me. So I'm going to go ahead and start straight stitching. You can kind of see that gray popped up there, but when I pull everything through to the back, it will go back through. Now once you hit a corner, I want you to lift your presser foot so that you can adjust your fabric. I have a knee lift on this machine and it spoils me rotten. I also have a thread cut, and I swear I would never buy another machine without both a knee lift and a thread cutter, the automatic thread cutter. Okay, let's, we are getting some major tension issues. What's going on? Oh, it got caught in the foot. Okay, something like this will happen. When I switched out the foot, the thread got caught, but all the stitches are fine, and it's actually good to leave this in so that you can see it. I can take these out, but more than likely what I'll do is when I get back around to this side, I'll take out a few of those just by pulling them out with a needle, and I'll show you how so that I can continue some stitches down there, and that way I have some thread in the back to knot. But for now, I'll just keep going around. You want to keep the stitches fairly close to the edge, but not too close to the edge where the fabric will just fray out. Now this will hold applique for some washing. It is not the best for keeping the fabric from fraying and eventually wearing out, but it is the simplest way to put down machine applique. This would be perfect for wall hangings, or for maybe fabric art. A lot of applique can be used for fabric art. And this would be a good way. When you get to a corner, just go slow. If you have a machine that lets you adjust how fast you can go, some people have a little bit of a lead foot and they need that lever to force them to go slow. And some pedals are also not quite sensitive. You push on it and it just goes zoom. You do want to go slow on this. Mine, I can barely tap it and it will just do one stitch, and I know it will just do one stitch. That's why I love this machine so much. Oh, I love this machine so much. Oh, this is not sponsored or anything by Juki. I just really, really love my machine. All right, so I am going to keep going around in a straight stitch, and I will come back to you when I show you how I fix that boo-boo up at the very front. One sec. Okay, so we're back near the beginning, and I wasn't sure if I mentioned this earlier, but I am doing a 2.2 on my stitch length for the straight stitch. I like to go smaller. Anything around a 2 will be good. Start going up to 3, and it's just not going to last as long. So I'm using the head or the tip of my pin, just a regular old straight pin, just to kind of pull. I'm trying not to mess up the fabric. But I'm just going to go ahead and pull down to the start of this curve. I just need a little bit more thread underneath to tie. And then what you'll do is just kind of pull on the bobbin thread slightly, and then that one will always come through. And so I can just slide that off to the side, and then I'll tie that into a knot later, and then I can clip it closer to the knot. So right now, we're going just to keep going slowly, and I want to maneuver this very last stitch up at the point to be in the same area as that one right there. And I'll use my hand wheel to do it. Bury the needle all the way down, then maneuver the fabric. And for these, I'm just going to go ahead and use the hand wheel to make sure that my stitches go in the same spot as they were before. I was trying to get a little bit bigger. And then no one will ever know that that little mishap happened. Oh, you go a little bit further with that guy. Come on. There we go. Now, if you do have automatic thread cutter, don't use it. You want to lift the presser foot, draw out some thread, and give yourself a nice bit of a tail, because that will give you plenty underneath to pull through. And then what I'll do is I will just knot these pieces together, nice double or triple knot, and then I can trim relatively close. Okay, so now I will be back in just a moment. I'm going to switch out the thread so I can show you satin stitch on the bodice. Okay, I know I just said satin stitch, I mean zigzag stitch. Most sewing machines do come with a zigzag stitch. I have a Juki made for quilting. It just does a straight stitch, doesn't do a zigzag. I love that machine too, by the way. But most of them will do at least a straight stitch and a zigzag, even older machines. It's wonderful. So we are going to do that here, and we're going to do it on the bodice. So I'm going to start here on the bottom. I want to do a small zigzag. I am doing a 2.0 for the width and a 1.4 for the stitch length. And once again, you want to make sure you have some thread to work with, and you want to use the hand crank to get that first stitch down. You want to be ever so slightly off. I'm going to be showing, you can see this right here, the blanket stitch. I will be showing that next. I just kind of recorded these particular segments in a little bit of a different order because of what color of thread was in my machine. But you want to start ever so slightly off. Once again, we are not back stitching. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I think it decided it was going to backstitch. Must have heard me say something. That was very strange. I did not press that button. Now, earlier when I said accidentally satin stitch, that's really just a zigzag stitch that is very, very tight. Like the movement forward is minimal, so you're getting a real machine embroidery effect. That's not necessary for this. Zigzag works great. Right here, I want to hand crank. I really want to catch that fabric so I don't have a point just flapping around. And then turn when the needle is buried. And then I want to adjust here just to make sure I have it exactly where I want it. Because I do use different colors of thread, I don't want there to be too much overlap on the other pieces, because those are different colored fabrics, different colored threads. Around a curve, go slow. One leg of a stitch at a time, and you might need to adjust your fabric. So at each leg, I am adjusting my fabric using my knee lift on my machine. If you don't have a knee lift, then you'll just come back here and lift it ever so slightly. It doesn't have to be lifted all the way up. Just enough to take the pressure off the fabric so that you can move it without it bunching. Alright, so we're almost here. So now I like on inside corners like this to make this leg of the zigzag come back into the same spot. Alright, there we go. And then move the fabric. No, that did not do exactly as I planned, so let's try this again. Right there. Okay, now move. And then move. I will have other videos showing the intricacies of doing these stitches on inner corners and outer corners. All sorts of fun stuff. So if I have not already linked them in this video, keep an eye out for them. They are coming. See, it's not as pretty as I would have hoped. My needle was back a little bit further. The camera's a little in my view, so I wasn't able to see it perfectly, but that still works. Now this stitch, very similar to the blanket stitch, is excellent for using on projects that are more likely to be washed or handled. If you want to do a baby quilt, this works great. Oh, you know what? I am going to back that one up and go there. I want to finish. There we go. Where it started. Makes for a neater join. I'm going to pull out plenty of thread. Snip it. So I can pull it through. So what I'm going to do, so I can show you, use my bobbin thread just to kind of yank gently. Oh, I got looped up there. Sometimes a little straight pin comes in handy. That one decided to get knotted up there. So I am going to snip it and pray that I have enough to make a knot. And that it didn't get caught on something else. There we go. So with these, I'm just going to do a simple double knot. Try to keep the threads as close together as possible. So I'll kind of make that tight. My second knot's already ready to go. Boom, just like that. You could use a needle too, if you want, but if I have enough to tie it, I'll just tie it like so. Because I have the beginning and the end in the same area, I'm going to make that tight and then pull that. What I'll do is after I have that double knot, is I'll take these two guys and I'll knot them together. You can put a little dot of fray ease on this if you want. I usually don't find that necessary, but you can. It's up to you. All right. And there we go. And then I'm just going to snip it, giving it maybe 1/4 of an inch. All right, and there's that one finished. So now we're back with the third machine stitch, which is the blanket stitch. Now your machine will need to have a preset stitch for this. Mine does. It is the Juki DX7. It's a number 6. Some machines have several blanket stitches. You do need this on the machine. It's a little bit more advanced. I wouldn't recommend it for someone who is just learning how to sew, or really just learning how to machine applique. You kind of want to go a little bit slow, but I just wanted to show you parts of it right here in case you were interested. Now your machine will recommend that you use a particular foot. Mine is using an eye, and I'm going to adjust the camera angle, I think, just a little bit, so it might better show you head on. There we go. Let's see if that'll be easier for you to see. Okay. We need to use this open-toed foot, just like the zigzag stitch, and it has a little break in it, and that is where you want to line up the forward movement of your stitch. You can see here it will have a stitch that goes forward and then a stitch that goes like that, and that is the blanket stitch. So you want to position that forward stitch at the very end. You want it to just barely catch off the fabric onto your background fabric. And so then as you curve, you just need to try to keep that area right in that spot. And go slow on this. There is no rush. And here we are coming up to a turn. And sometimes when I get closer here, I want to hand crank with the little handle on the side, just to make sure I get where I want. Because I'm actually going to make it go slightly more than it would have, so that I can get it right in that divot. See if I can. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see it, but it is right in the corner, like right there. I'll use a pin to show you on the opposite side. I have the needle pressed right there on the other side. You're going to let it do it sideways, and then come back, and then move the fabric. So now it's going to go down your new corner, the new leg, and it's going to be very nice. Now with a curve, if it's a gentle curve, you can just kind of follow along. However, this is a very steep curve. So I'm going to want to go slow again, and I'm going to need to lift my presser foot ever so slightly for many of these adjustments. Now right here again, I'm going to want to advance with my hand wheel. So I'm at the very tip. And then continue to lift my presser foot as needed to adjust the fabric underneath, so that each stitch is following along that line. And now you can see right here, there's a little bit of a wobbliness. Sometimes you can't get it in there exactly right. Sometimes it's better to make it do 2 tiny stitches rather than 1 big stitch. But it's going to hold this on very well. This is an excellent choice if you want to do a pillow or a quilt that you think might be washed quite a bit. This works a lot better than the straight stitch at keeping the edges from fraying. It's kind of similar to the zigzag stitch, which just kind of keeps everything there nice and neat. And just like all the other stitches, you want to leave a tail at the front, the beginning, and you want to leave a nice tail at the end so that you can pull your stitches through to the back. So I'm going to continue doing this to finish the mermaid, and then we're going to show you the hand stitching. And we are back and ready for my favorite portion of the stitching on And that is hand sewing. I do most of mine with hand sewing. If they're more art quilts or they're going to hang on the wall, I will use a blanket stitch if I am making something that needs to be able to be washed, like pillows or baby quilts, things like that. Those definitely do get the machine stitches, but I personally love hand stitching. It's kind of like stitch therapy. So you can see we have done the 3 types of machine stitches on this guy. There is the blanket stitch. That one is the more difficult one. And then I would say that the second more difficult one would be the zigzag, just because you have to make sure, like, corners can be a bit difficult to get perfect. And then the straight stitch is the easiest. However, in washability, blanket stitch, zigzag stitch, you can even make that finer to where it's more of a cross between a satin stitch and the zigzag stitch, and that will do really well. But for the hair, we are going to do hand stitching, hand sewing. Every time I mention this to people and I say, oh, I just hand stitch them, they look at me in horror. Oh, I can't do that. I can't possibly. Sure you can. If you want to. You can do it if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine. Use a machine. Absolutely. But I'm going to hand stitch. I could match with the lime, but I like to give myself lots of thread, and with leftover thread, I'll just kind of go through and make little embellishments. So I am using an Aurifil. This is one of their variegated threads. So look and see if I can see the number. I think it's 460, if that little sticker in there is correct. I'm not sure what colorway it is, but it variegates, you know, like light silver. It has a very greenish tint to it. I think it's perfect for a mermaid's hair. She's going to have ever so slightly green hair from all the seaweed sheets. So what we're going to do is, I tied a knot. I have 2 arm lengths because I double my thread, and I didn't show you how to knot your thread. I am so sorry. So I threaded my needle. I'm going to snip this off because I'm going to show you how to knot your thread, because you might want to see the way I do it. So you take the needle in one hand, the 2 thread bits in the other, and I grasp them with, I am right-handed, so I grasp them with my dominant hand so that those are being pinched together. And I'm just going to wind this 2 to 3 times around the needle. So now I'm going to pinch those loops with my other hand and just kind of push the needle through slowly, or else you will get a nice snarl that will not make your day. And then you'll end up with a knot. So now I will start underneath. And you can do the sewing method or you can do the stab method. I will do the sewing method, 1 or 2 stitches at a time, where I'm just putting it in and then coming out. I give it about a 1/16 of an inch, maybe up to an 1/8 of an inch. And then pull the thread through. The first couple times you will want to go slowly. I find that I have a lot of snarling that will happen with specific hand quilting threads and Aurifil. They just seem to like to snag up on me a little bit better. But I really wanted to show you a variegated thread for this. So 1 to 2 stitches at a time for sewing method works great, especially if you're going around curves. See, it just really wants to snag up on me. It needs to be nice to me. There we go. Just make it go down gently. I find it more difficult to do the stab method. That's where you're going all the way through and then pulling the thread through, and then you're going to go in from the back. Sometimes it can be difficult to find your place. Like now, you need to try to turn it over and stab through, and sometimes it's easier to miss the mark, and then I prefer the sew method, but just for a few stitches at a time. So what I will do with this is I will go ahead and go around. I will go down here, and I will use more to embellish it. I'll make little waves in her hair and stuff like that. And so when I am done, I will show you how I knot the thread in the back, and then we will move on to the hand embellishments. So we'll see you in just a sec. So here we are with the mermaid. I did the top part of her hair with the stitching, and I'm going to show you how I knot the thread in the back before I move to another section. Ending up right here, and so what I'm going to do is somewhere in those lines, I'm going to take a teeny tiny little stitch, and sometimes this even just, and it really should just pick up the fabric underneath the background, and it doesn't even come forward on the front. I'm going to pull my needle through, hold the loop out to the side. I'm not pulling it all the way through, but once I get closer to the end, I'm going to wrap the thread around twice and then pull it tight, and it will automatically navigate the knot down to the fabric because you locked into the fabric first. If I try to just make a knot on the thread, sometimes it ends up far and then you might have a loose stitch. But because I took a little stitch right there, and I can show it again. I don't normally knot things twice, but I'll just show you how I did it again. Tiniest amount of fabric right there. That locks the knot close to the fabric. Wrap it around twice, pull through, and the knot goes right down there. Alright, so I will finish up the other parts of the stitching, and then we'll be back. I'll show you how to use a light box to do your hand embroidery, or at least mark out where the embroidery or thread painting will go. So we'll be right back. We're back with our mermaid and our light box. We're now going to trace the hand embellishment underneath. I'm using an Artograph Light Tracer 2. I have had this thing for ages. I will put some links down below for some newer ones that I might possibly want to get if I were in the market for one now, because this one is rather large and might not be easy to see because of the light coming in the window, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it on camera. Oh, mark through it. The 2 pens I use currently for marking, this is the Clover water erasable. It does have an eraser pen that comes with it. That's blue. And then this one is Mark Be Gone. And this one is air and water soluble, and the blue side is water soluble. The purple one I will only use if it's a small area that I'm going to do very quickly, because it can go pretty, erase itself pretty easily where I live, where the air is more humid. I'm in Georgia. I can barely see that. Sometimes with the light box you can normally see, but I have sunshine right through this window. It's kind of messing up my light box flow. Maybe it will go behind a cloud or something. But you can always, if you don't have a light box, you can hold it up to the window and look through it that way. That works great. But for my purposes, I can see it. So I'm just going to mark it. There we go. You can also hold it in place if you're comfortable, because you remember where it is. We're going to show you 2 different types of the hand embellishment. One, with actual hand embellishment with embroidery floss. And that is something that you can use your hand embellishment guide for. It will show you the recommended number of strands and the type of stitch to use. But I'm also going to show you how to use the sewing machine to do some. I think we'll do that on her face. That's a couple tight curves, so that will be a really good demonstration. And now with this one, it's going to be impossible for me to see because of the sunlight coming in. And with her scales, though, they don't have to be exact. You could even just look at the paper and then just kind of hand draw them into place, and that's going to work just fine. I'll do that for the last 2. They're going to go in approximately the right place. It may not be perfect, but for the scales on her tail, it's going to be just fine. And so now these will kind of hold, and you can probably barely see the blue marks on the blue fabric, but I can see them well enough to hand stitch. And I think we will show the face first. So we'll be right back once I get the machine set up. Okay, we are back at the machine. I took some scrap fabric and did some test stitching to see what tiny stitches I wanted to use for embellishing the face. And I'm actually going with a 1.6 stitch length. On some machines, I know on my Janome Magnolia, you can't dial in certain ones. So you just need to maybe turn it in between 1 and 2, or 2 or 1 might suffice for. So it's always good to test that out first before you mar your mermaid's face with stitches that you think might be a little bit too big. So here's her face. Those are some pretty tight curves, but we're just going to go over them one way, turn around, and come back the other way, and that should be enough to give us the definition. If it's not, then we'll just do one more and go from there. I want to make sure once again that I have a relatively long tail. I'm still using my open toe foot so I can see what's going on, and I'm using my hand wheel to make sure that that stitch goes down exactly where I want. Remember, I'm not back tacking. I'm doing one stitch at a time. If you are nervous about pressing that foot pedal, just do the hand wheel the entire time. As a matter of fact, that's what I'm doing right now. This entire first part of the eye is hand wheel. Let me get that situated to where I like, because I am not happy. There we go. Now I'll take it. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and turn it around there. Go back with the way I came. It doesn't have to follow the line exactly. Just lift that presser foot ever so slightly. Move your stitches where you want them to go. Yeah, I think I'm going to go back a third time. Get that thread tail out of the way before. There we go. Okay, and once again, needle up, long thread tail to pull through. Go ahead and pull them through to the back. Okay. So now you can see the stitching over the, it got a little messy back in there. Not sure if I think that's actually pretty tied down. If you run into something like that, the ends of those threads are pretty well in there. I just sewed over it 3 times. So those starting ones might be able to be clipped. They're fine. Then I can go to the front and just clip that little guy. Just so I can show you how I'm going to get that mark out. You can wet this and it will come out. It comes out really easy too. You don't need to soak it. Just a little bit like a spritz water bottle. We usually get it off, no problem. But I will just show you the eraser pen side of the clover one I had showed you. Yeah. And so once that dries, the blue mark is gone. And so while that dries, I'll go ahead and do the mouth. Give myself a little bit of a tail. Lift the presser foot, turn the fabric, go back the way you came. The 1.6 stitch seems to be excellent for turning these small curves. You might even want to go back and maybe add waves to her hair or something with it in more of a thread painter fashion. That would actually be a lot of fun. And now you can see where that has dried a little bit more. And that has a really nice effect, and that lasts a long time too. If you are doing, let's say you're using these blocks to make a mermaid quilt for your new grandbaby or for your daughter, you will want to use this to do your embellishments instead of floss, because this will wash and wash and wash and wash. You can throw this thing into the machine. It will come out just fine. I would definitely use the machine only if it's something that is going to be used and well loved, especially by children, and washed. So I'm going to finish this up, and then I'm going to come back with some floss and some thread, and I will show you how I do the scales. I finished the machine stitching on her face, and this time I'm going to use floss to do the scales. Now it is very difficult for me to see the scales because I drew it on with the blue pen. This is darker. I can kind of see it. I don't know if you can see it on the camera at all, so I'm going to show you something that I use for darker fabrics. You will want to test this first, but I have found that every quilt weight I have used it with has come out. This is called magic chalk. And so what it is, it's tailor's chalk that comes out with a steam iron. So you can use a little knife to get this to a finer point if you want. That'll be fine for my purposes. And so I am just going to go over the areas that I want to stitch on this dark fabric so that I can see what I'm doing. So that's a much better guide if you have a dark fabric and then it just comes out with the steam iron. So I'm going to wrap that up and set that off to the side. The embroidery floss that I am using for this one is an Anchor. It's 205. I thought that the contrast of that dark sea green would be really lovely against the tail. And in order to do the back stitching on this, it will show the recommendations on the embellishment guide. I do not have that in front of me. I want to say it's 3 strands. I could be wrong. If you're looking at the pattern right now and it says something completely different from what I am showing you, then you just go with whatever you feel is best. This is a bigger block. This is the 12-inch block. I would not use a full strand. That it gets to be too bulky. That's just too much. But usually at least half works great. I am using some embroidery needles. These are Drits. These are just the ones that were available to me. I'm not particularly fond of them, if I'm going to be honest, but that's what I have. And so I'm just going to thread that through. Now you are not going to double your embroidery floss. You're going to bring it through with a couple inches, and then you're going to tie the knot. And if you watched earlier in the video when I did some of the stitching, you'll see my knot, but I'll show it again. I pinch, wrap twice for embroidery floss, and then pinch the knot through. And then that usually makes your knot not quite so huge. So I'm just going to adjust something real quick. All right. I'm going to start at the top part, and we're going to do something called back stitch. So I'm going to do the first 2 stitches similar to like just the sewing method, but instead of going forward, I'm going to move backwards. So I'm going to now put the needle in the same hole where that previous stitch went under. And so it's going to make more of a continuous line. So now I continue in that fashion from underneath, from under here. And it's easier if you watch the top while you do it. You want the point to come out a stitch length away, and then you're going to put the point back in there. And then you're just going to keep going. Now when I finish up this little scale up here, I am going to just travel to the next area that needs stitching, because it's right here. It's very, very close. So I'm just going to travel to right there, and I'll show that in just a second. If it is a larger pattern that you're working on, and it's good to have a rule of thumb, I generally will not travel the thread on the back more than an inch. If it's a light colored fabric, I might not try to travel the thread at all if I can help it. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and use the sewing method to put that point where I want it. And this is not a very far travel at all. You can see on the back how I'm going to have that right there. And when you have a thread traveling, you just want to make sure that you don't leave it super loose, but also that you don't pull it too tight. If you pull it too tight, it's going to make the fabric on top pucker, and it's not going to look pretty. So you want the fabric on top to still lay nice and flat, but you don't want any gaping threads. Okay, so once I finish off this area, I'm actually going to tie a knot on the back, and I'm going to move on to the other areas, and then I will show you the mermaid finished. And we'll probably discuss some of the things that you can do with this mermaid too. Like this particular one is going to turn into a pillow. So I'll be back in just a moment. And we're back. We're finished with the mermaid. As you can see, we went through and we did all the hand embroidery to finish off the scales. So this lovely young lady just shows all the different techniques. Remember, we did the hand stitching to put on parts of her. We did the straight stitching to put that on. We did the blanket stitch to attach her tail. And then we did the zigzag stitch to attach her bodice. And then we showed the two different ways that you can do the embellishments, which is of course the hand stitching using back stitch with the floss, and then also just a very tiny straight stitch that I went back and forth to create that. So there we go. There is the mermaid block. I did put her on a slightly larger area than you need to, than is necessary for the block. However, I did that for a reason. I'm going to turn this into a mini quilt, and that will be a video in the future. As a matter of fact, once that is published, I will go ahead and I will put a link to it right here in case you want to go and see how this lovely lady is turned into a art quilt, little mini art quilt that you can hang on the wall. All right, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye.